Welcome back, my dear viewers. Today we'll be covering the new development of GPU-powered civilization simulators. And I'll give you a bonus tip about in-editor optimizations that I discovered this week. Recap. In our last video, we left off with some with the completed CPU-driven simulator. And if you remember, it took about 30 seconds to perform calculations for a single turn. And in a situation where 100 turns would be pretty basic, that amount of time would simply not cut it. As per usual, I managed to implement every single suggestion I was given from the last video. I had no suggestions from the last video, if you didn't catch on to that joke. But anyway, let's go over the new features. In the previous iteration, as new plots were conquered, every adjacent plot that was undiscovered would be added to the Known Islands and Oceans directory. Well, in the new version, for it to work correctly with the compute shader, all plots in the area must be added to the buffer. Let's go into a more technical deep dive. All the plots are sorted in layers from the center extending out, starting from the bottom left corner of the ring and wrapping around clockwise. Whenever an island needs referencing that is outside of the current known islands list, the system has to expand the number of rings until the desired island plot is reached. This is required because it makes it possible to find the index of the plot in the compute shader compute buffers. And it allows to find the index from a position, and it allows to find the position from an index. However, that sort of thing is not going to be required for the Army's and Navy's buffers, which will allow for player intervention to affect these variables without destructive consequences. Also, here's what I discovered in the editor. Turns out, when you have a list, and especially if that list is a struct, which is a pretty big data type, depending on how many variables you put into it, it can severely slow down your game just to have it serialized in the editor. As you can see, I have this one set, this island data set to serialized, and when I have the starting number of rings set to 10 and I hit play, you can see it goes really quickly. Right now we're hovering around 500 to 600 FPS, and it kind of lags a little bit when I start scrolling down, but it's fine. However, when I up this to, let's say, 1,000 and I hit play, you will very quickly notice how much longer it takes to load. This is because I assume that Unity has to add in every single struct into the list and make it visible and do all sorts of crazy stuff. We'll know when it's finished loading, when it switches from scene view into game view, and then we'll also be able to see what the FPS is looking like. And no, I'm not going to skip this because I don't feel like editing today. And so you get to hear and see the whole raw take, how long it really takes for it to load. And no, I won't even bother putting in chapters or markers or telling you what time to skip ahead to. You'll just have to suffer through the whole thing. In theory, the number of islands that will appear in the active islands plot thing. Oh. We've hit the maximum allowed limit. Too big. And you can see it's at 2 FPS, and it didn't even register when I clicked here. So that was too big. Probably should have set it to 100 instead of 1,000. Hello? Man, I really don't want to edit this. Please stop playing. Okay, the whole window is frozen. Oh. Okay, it caught back up. Hello? Okay. Now, we'll set it to 100 instead and see what that looks like. We got to illustrate the differences here. 100 is like 10% of 1,000, and so this should be 90% faster. That's my math there. Okay, yeah. So, it did work this time. And we're actually doing pretty good in terms of FPS. Sitting at around 5 to 400. And we have about 40,000 items in the islands thing. Now, let's try doing the same, but instead of... we'll change nothing except for the serialized field part. I actually do think I could have set this starting ring size to 1,000 instead of 100, but because of these new variables right here, these Army and Navy variables, these are potentially 3 times longer than the island data and the ocean data variable lengths are, which is what those 2 error messages were from. But anyway, let's try it now with the non-serialized field. You also will see how quickly it loads, and instead of 4 to 500, we're going 500, pretty solid high 500, sometimes going up into 600. So that's a little tip. It's not quite so easy to see when it's just 100 by 100, but it is very noticeable when you start getting into 1,000 by 1,000, which would be a few 100,000, I believe. No. Yes. I don't care. Moving on to future plans. Once again, the simulation, especially on the GPU side, is not really even close to being done. Still have to determine conflict zones and make a brain for the militaries. Some issues are still mysteries on how to solve, like how armies will ride along with navies, how will ocean routes work, and conquering islands will happen in parallel. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Usual. Link to Patreon is added automatically by YouTube, so you can click on it if you want. Goodbye.